All right, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to part one of our Getting Back on the Bus virtual conference series, Restoring and Growing Ridership. So I'm Lisa Guthrie. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association, and I also want to welcome Deputy Director Danny Plogger from our office, who will be handling the technological aspects of the Zoom meeting today. We've shifted our conference session presentations to this virtual Zoom format because of the coronavirus meeting restrictions, and we want to thank you all for your willingness to participate virtually and hope to make the best of our Zoom session today. We're recording the webinar, and it will be available on our website following the event. We'll save all the questions for the end of the presentations. Please send your questions via the chat box, which you can pull up by mousing toward the bottom of your screen. And Danny will ask them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We ask that you remain muted during the presentations. So we hope that you can stay with us until the end of the presentation, because we're going to have a special link to our virtual trivia quiz to win a $100 gift card courtesy of our 2020 virtual conference mini expo and luncheons title sponsor, Sonny Merryman, our sponsor for today and the whole series, Virginia's Bus Company. It's because of generous supporters like this that we're able to offer our conference sessions and expos. We're pleased to offer a little insight into Sonny Merryman so you can get to know them better. So I think you see some familiar faces up there. Okay, and so thank you, Sonny Merryman, for helping us with this. And now I'd like to introduce our session moderator, Mike Norvell. Mike is the Vice President of Developing and Marketing at Bay Aging in Urbana, Virginia. Previously, Mike did market research and strategic transportation consulting for the Southeastern Institute of Research, many of us know them by SIR, in Richmond. Prior to joining SIR in 2013, Mike worked for VRide, formerly VPSI, for 29 years, including serving as Vice President of Business Development and Marketing and European Director. He has served on the VTA Executive Committee since 2015. Welcome, Mike. You've got some outstanding panelists today to introduce.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished panelists today. Scudder Wagg is a transit planner, project manager, and East Coast office leader with Jarrett, Walker & Associates. His focus is on transit network redesign, facilitating conversations about multimodal planning issues, and applying innovative mapping tools to enrich conversations about planning issues. Scudder has successfully led major transit network studies in Richmond, Alexandria, Philadelphia, Miami, Memphis, and many other cities. Adrienne Torres is the Director of Planning and Scheduling at GRTC Transit System in Richmond. During her 6 years at GRTC, she's been involved in the transit network redesign, the Bus Rapid Transit Project, and the Transit Development Plan. Prior to working at GRTC, Adrienne spent 3 years working in the Budget and Strategic Planning Office at the City of Richmond. Adrienne received her BA from the University of Virginia and her Master's in Public Administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. Next, we have Ken Pollock. Ken has been the Transit Director for Bay Transit since 2000. During that time, Bay Transit grew from a 3-county service area to its current size of 12 counties, an area covering more than 3,000 square miles. Previously, Ken served as the Rural Transit Program Administrator for DRPT. He serves on both the CTAV and VTA boards of directors. Jim Wright is a partner, senior strategic marketing planner for Pulsar Advertising, and a native Virginian who has led the development of brands and strategic marketing plans for dozens of transit and transportation agencies. Jim brings more than 25 years of senior advertising, marketing, social, digital, mobile, PR, branding, and market research experience to Pulsar, with an emphasis on transit, transportation demand management, and transportation clients that require citizen and business behavior change. Jim has worked with 5 of the 10 largest commuter rail systems, as well as some of the leading transit and TDM agencies across the U.S. So let's jump right in.
Hello, this is Scudder Wagg. Mike, thanks for the the great introduction. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I'm seem to have had a Murphy's Law of technology just as we were starting this webinar where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So my video is not on because my internet is extremely unstable and my phone is apparently barely working for the moment. So I apologize if there are any problems with my audio. Thank you all for your time today. I wanted to just talk a little bit about, ridership recovery in a COVID-19 world and what does it look like? What does it mean to talk about success in our situation? So Danny, next slide. I wanted to start off with the big question of ultimately, does ridership equal success? Obviously, right now, many transit agencies across the country and in Virginia have experienced enormous declines in ridership, but the declines have not been evenly felt across agencies. Commuter-focused agencies like Long Island Railroad, BART, and San Francisco have seen probably the most significant declines. And agencies where riders are more concentrated in low-income occupations have seen less of an increase, as you'll see when Adrienne talks. But just the fundamental question of, is ridership the measure of our success? We argue in many places and in many times it is not the case. And today we ought to be hammering home that ridership numbers are not a sign of our success. Danny, next slide. That in large part, we ought to be thinking about the success of transit in most places right now as transit's role in holding our world together. Because so many people are not riding transit because they're staying home. People in privileged situations like myself and many of us on this call don't have to be in the office, can manage to do things by not being in the office. But for us to be where we are and the rest of the world to be where it is, trying to remain safe, requires so many other people to go out about in the world. And transit is essential to allowing those people to get out and about in the world and get to their jobs at hospitals, at doctor's offices, at grocery stores. And if not for us doing that, us working to help get those people around, the rest of us could not get along and survive. So in a sense, all of us as civilization are dependent on public transport right now. Which is a way of flipping on the head the typical conversation about who is transit dependent in a way. So that is, I think, the ultimate argument right now about the usefulness and importance of public transit in the face of this decline in ridership. And of course, it is the argument about an important job that transit has always been doing and that we should highlight. But as we start to open up and as we start thinking about the future and as places come back, we know we're going to continue to be judged on ridership in some way. Next slide, Danny. But we should always remind people that ridership has never really always been the best measure. It is something that we are judged on because it is relatively easy to measure compared to a lot of other things, but it is exceptionally volatile. It is affected by so many things outside of transit's control: gas prices, the general condition of the economy, and obviously an enormous global pandemic. And most importantly, it's not always what the leaders who fund transit, political leaders in local government, for example, tell you what to do. Even sometimes when they judge you on ridership, they don't always tell you to do the things that would get you ridership. And that raises the question of what other things should we be thinking about? Next slide, Danny. In public transport, there are a whole lot of different goals and priorities that people bring to the table: livability, equity and inclusion, sustainability and environmental concerns, economic prosperity, general access and freedom. And I would argue, and our firm often argues, that inside of all of these things are the ideas of sustainable freedom for as many people as possible, allowing as many people as possible to get to places as quickly and as easily as possible, which implies a goal of maximizing access for as many people as possible, which in many cases, next slide, Danny, leads us in a direction of network design that emphasizes maximum ridership. So if you've seen our work in many places, you see us talk about ridership goals lead us to high frequency network designs like the one on the right, where we measure success based on productivity, which is your ridership relative to cost. But of course, in any community, when we talk about maximizing frequency and maximizing access and usefulness, it leads us to the problem of the geometric challenge of doing so means we can't get to every place within the budgets we usually have. And that leads us into conflict with the other big goal, next slide, Danny, which is the group of coverage goals, meaning getting some service to everyone, which leads us to low frequency network design, routes on every street, but not a lot of usefulness because frequencies are low. And even in the COVID environment, it's important to consider this because it always forces us to consider the performance measures of productivity versus availability. And it also forces leaders in your community to consider if they are asking you to do things that are focused on coverage, they are therefore asking you not to maximize your ridership. They're also not asking you to maximize your usefulness. And that still matters in a COVID world. Next slide, Danny. This conflict is a geometric conflict, and even in a COVID-19 world, it still matters because being clear about what you're trying to do, what are your measures of success, and what other people are asking you to do, and whether it is a thing that is high coverage or high ridership still matters for your expectations for success. And it still matters because we know, even in a COVID world, a high frequency network is still a backstop for reliability, which is a really important thing when you're dealing with social distancing requirements, and you may have to pass people up when you're too crowded. It's also the network that still provides the greatest freedom to the greatest number of people, to the greatest number of destinations in a COVID condition. And we know, next slide, how to build that network. We know how geometrically it works, and we know what trade-offs are required when you shift in your direction between high ridership and high coverage. And we can measure what that means. The example on the right being our isochron maps, walls around your life, how far you can get, in this case, from Norfolk State University in Norfolk to all of the places in and around there in 30, 45, or 60 minutes. Showing you the usefulness of connections across a network so you can go any which way when you make connections in a well-connected transit network. Next slide, Danny. Now, the geometric factors still apply in a COVID-19 world, but we do have to obviously consider one of the biggest things that's different is that today density doesn't necessarily align perfectly with built form because so many major destinations are empty. Universities, which are often one of your prime places for getting high ridership, are obviously mostly empty. And many are talking about opening in the fall in some capacity, but they're probably still going to be much less major ridership drivers. Downtown office towers are largely empty right now, and so are not major destinations. Relatively speaking, though, grocery stores, hospitals are busier destinations than they have been in the past and probably will be. So if we don't think about ridership as success, thanks, Danny, what can we think about as success? We would suggest measuring and thinking about the freedom and opportunity change that your networks achieve. This is an example from our work in Alexandria showing a network change, and in blue, the new areas you could reach in a changed network, and how many more jobs, how many more people you could reach, and thus how much more just general opportunity you could reach. because ultimately improving and increasing people's access to opportunity will, in the long term, improve ridership. But more importantly, now, in the short term, it is improving people's freedom and opportunity and liberty. Irrespective of where they're trying to go, it expands the potential opportunity. And then one other thing to note, next slide, Danny, is that those sorts of measures we can aggregate for different people and measure racial and social justice outcomes. Obviously, in this moment in time, those issues are front of mind. And so, as an example from a place we're working in here, you can see we can measure the average number of jobs that an average resident can reach and an average resident of color could reach. In this case, we're comparing an existing network and two potential redesigned networks, coverage and ridership. And one of the things I think I want to note here is the existing network in this particular place actually has slightly lower access for residents of color, which suggests from a racial or social justice outcome, we, just have a significant challenge here that we need to think about, because we would hope that we would be providing similar or better access, particularly in this community where residents of color are actually in the denser parts of the city. Next slide. So I just want to wrap up by noting that in this time, what can you do? Be clear about the short-term goal of being the essential service that's helping to keep civilization operating. Be nimble in managing demand. I'm sure, as Adrienne will mention, this is a time where a lot of communication with a lot of different major institutions and others are going to be necessary. Probably, I can't imagine the life of a service planner right now. It's probably very challenging. And as you consider changes, consider quick and thoughtful ways of getting feedback on it. And then don't be constrained by the old system. It's very unlikely that we will emerge into the same exact pattern of demand in a year or two that we have today, because in the interim, so much is likely to change. So as you are being nimble and being thoughtful about how you balance ridership and coverage in the short term, be prepared for the reality that you may just never go back to the old system you had in your place, in your city, in your town. So with that, I think Adrienne has a few words to say about her recent experience in Richmond. Are you there, Adrienne?
I think I got it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Scudder said, I am the Director of Planning and Scheduling for GRTC Transit System down in Richmond, Virginia. And we're just going to give our agency perspective of what we did during COVID as we made service plans, the service planning perspective of all of it. I can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. One of the first things we looked at as service planners, we typically make decisions based on trends, what we've seen in ridership, knowing that routes, what the loads look like, and have many months of data to look at. With COVID-19, we were kind of making predictions of what we thought would happen, not really knowing what would happen day to day. So all we had was ridership at that point in time, and that was our first variable. And what this shows is our different modes of transit. We have paratransit and how they had reductions during COVID-19. This is showing May, but it was a similar story the last 2 weeks of March as well as April, where paratransit was down 56%. Our bus rapid transit line, Pulse, was down 53%. Our local route, they had less of an impact, but we're still down 22%. And then, of course, our express routes, all the commuters working from home, were significantly down at 93%. We looked at this information, and first thing we thought was, let's switch to Sunday service, looking at what some of the other agencies did. But then we realized, well, we are an essential service, and started to look at, you can go to the next slide, look at loads. And what this map shows is the loads on all of our routes. And the red line shows 30 or more people on a particular trip. And this is PM peak, but we saw the same kind of trend for midday and PM peak. The orange, I believe, is 20 to 29, and then the yellow lines show up to 19 people. So we had started at this point kind of roping off the driver area, so it was backdoor entrance only, and trying to do social distancing of at least 6 feet. So the higher the load, the more difficult, of course, it would be to accomplish this. So that kind of made us think, well, maybe we shouldn't do Sunday service because that's just going to reduce the number of trips and vehicles out there. So with that, we actually, you can go to the next slide. We kind of did a resource review. And as the first slide showed, we looked at our paratransit as a resource that wasn't being utilized as much as they had been previously, with a drop of greater than 50%. And with the express routes being reduced, we went ahead and kind of used our paratransit vehicles to ensure they still had trips operating and had them run our express routes at a much reduced level. This went into place first. I think this was April 8th we started this, as well as fares were discontinued at the end of March. We then actually came together with a service plan, and we temporarily discontinued 2 other routes. These routes had alternative service that were more of the coverage scenario, or also had low ridership. People were using them to kind of go more so into town with the university, or were connecting to our Pulse service, so saw less use than normal. So we discontinued those routes. And what that did is that actually gave us more operators to put on our extra board. So anything that came up throughout each day, which was different, whether it was an operator being called out because they were sick and the route needed to be covered, or we actually implemented what we called follow-up duties. And the follow-up duties, for example, our Pulse service may have had some trips that had 30 or more. We would actually put an extra vehicle out there to catch people who, if we didn't want to have 2 people on 1 vehicle. So this made just moving resources around a little bit easier. Now, where do we go from here? We are planning on keeping this in place for at least our next service change, which at this point is in September. But what we are kind of looking at now is we are having more express riders returning to work. So evaluating whether we need to put more trips on there, and if our paratransit service starts to go up and that resource needs to go back to paratransit, we are looking at adding service back on the express route. But we still are keeping open as far as less trips than normal, since a lot of people are still going to be working from home. So everything is still kind of day by day, with the hope that we can actually put our normal service back into some level in September.
Thank you, Adrienne. Jim Wright.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Everybody loves an opportunity to talk about marketing and communications. This is the fun stuff, right? But, next slide, just restarting the routes and frequency of our transit services doesn't re-engage or reestablish the relationship with our lost customers. It requires communications, marketing, and reestablishing the inherent trust between a transit system and its customers. And it's done one at a time. And most transit systems, frankly, as well as most business owners, are simply overwhelmed with staffing and supplies and safety-related issues. Next slide. In order to flatten the curve, transit agencies had to disconnect from their customers and the community. This was necessary to protect our customers, our employees, and the community we serve from spreading COVID-19. But in order to achieve real recovery, transit agencies need to actively reestablish and restore their relationship, their connection to their customers, potential new customers, as well as employers and stakeholders. But for many transit systems, there's a belief, I hear it over and over, if we build it or we operate it, they'll come. And perhaps this has always been true, in the case of transit reliant. But in today's environment, proactive communications is going to be essential. Next slide. Back in the good old days, we knew what motivated commuters to think about changing how they get to work. And it was fundamentally based on 5 things: saving money, saving time, which saving time was #1 in the Metro DC area, reducing stress, bound time, and improving the environment. Next slide. And there were 5 life events that also triggered a reassessment of how they got to work. They were if someone changed jobs, they moved, having a family event like getting married or having a new baby or adoption. If there was construction on the road I'd take to work every day, or I was having major or frequent repairs to my aging automobile. Any of these would be good triggers for us to have an interaction or a conversation with them about, hey, have you ever tried taking the bus? Next slide. But today we have a new rider paradigm, one that balances the habit of how they commuted before COVID-19 with new health-related fears. On the one hand, we have our pre-existent habit of commuting to work that was driven by value, speed, efficiency, stress, and the environment. But now we have to balance that against the fear of me getting sick or possibly me making others sick. Many believe that this new paradigm, as we move towards the new normal, will drive people to commuting in their single occupancy vehicles simply out of fear. This also could contribute to all new levels of congestion as we get closer to full employment. Next slide. Transit agencies have always been great community partners, and the COVID-19 pandemic has given transit systems even greater opportunities to demonstrate the incredible community partners our transit agencies are. Some have adapted their service to deliver food or supplies to those who can't get out. Others have focused on delivering essential workers. COVID-19 has caused many transit systems to reevaluate or reimagine their purpose in order to help their community. Next slide. As we continue to transform our transit agencies, the new normal, it's even more important than ever to view employers as partners, in particular, large employers, by using our connections, our network, and our intelligence to find out what our business partners plan to do. That should drive planning for the transit system. You know, what good does it do to have that express route to that large employer campus if they made the business decision to expand telework as an ongoing business operations model? As I said earlier, it's essential that we reestablish that relationship we have with our customers. It's equally important to help our customers overcome their fear through transparency. You can't just tell them you're cleaning and protecting them. You have to show them across all points of possible physical contacts. Let me show you one example of one transit agency that has this kind of transparency. Let's give it It doesn't want to go away. Thank you. You know, the reason I like that slide, I like that video, I mean, the quality of it is terrible. We all could do a better job with kind of the background music of it, but I like it because it shows that we're doing a thorough job of cleaning the buses, but also we care about our employees. They were well protected. I thought that was, that particular example I thought was good. Anyway, I'd like to close by sharing a few examples of what some other transit systems are doing to overcome fear and reestablish that customer relationship and build trust. So for example, here with Foothill, they're using ambient signage at bus stops and on board to help customers have that physical cue for what social distancing is like, much like a lot of grocery stores and other retail operations are doing. Next slide. I know many of you, if not all of you, are doing something like Houston Metro, you know, is where they show how the new plastic enclosures are in place to protect drivers and customers. Next slide. As Chicago is starting to reopen, Metra is emphasizing transparency by not just saying they are sanitizing their trains, but showing them on social media and their website. Next slide. In addition, they're starting a campaign that reinforces this message with advertising, marketing, and social digital communications. This approach will not only rebuild trust with their customers, but attract those who are sitting in stop and go traffic in their single occupancy vehicles with a reassuring message that Metra is safe. Next slide. The New York MTA went through a period where the mayor actually told citizens to not ride the subways and buses. The MTA is preparing for the full reopening of the city with videos showing how they're cleaning and sanitizing trains, buses, and stations. But they're also investing in new technology and sharing that with their customers by using UV light to kill the COVID-19 germs. Next slide. Another great thing I think is to re-engage customers is to ask their feedback through a formal or informal survey. Doesn't have to cost a lot and can be done through social or simple tools like SurveyMonkey. Next slide. GRTC recommended that fares be suspended during the pandemic, and the end date I know is going to vary depending on each of your systems, but over the last 25 years, I can tell you, working with transit systems, we've learned that the very best way to build ridership is to get them on the bus. Getting people to try buses, light rail, commuter rail is the very best way to acquire new riders. In the past, we've had to forego fares, but now there's this window of opportunity to try to get riders to try your service for free. Free, the most powerful word in advertising. Even in the face of the pandemic, don't be afraid to capitalize on this free fare period to build trial. Next slide. In many of our communities in Virginia, the transit agencies are a large employer as well as a high-profile community partner. So use that community position to invite a reporter to ride along. Provide B-roll or high-res photos. The fact is, many news outlets do not have adequate resources, so make their job easy. Write the story for them, complete with photos and quotes. You'll be surprised how many of your own words show up in that article. Next slide. I know many of you are also doing an exceptional job with social and digital, and frankly, there's not a client we work with that isn't spending some money on social and digital content. But you know, just because you push out a tweet or you create a Facebook post, even those who follow you may not see it. So invest a few dollars, and again, it doesn't take a lot to promote your posts, and it's highly efficient because you have the ability to geo and demo target the audiences for those promoted posts. We can reach just the exact people we want to reach. So I want to end this with a video that our competitor, Uber, and just to show them how they're preparing the process of recovery from COVID-19.
This is a message from the future. Hi, I'm the next rider, the one who's going to be taking the Uber right after you.
You obviously don't know me.
Or me.
But still, you can take care of all of us by just taking care of yourself.
Make sure to take all the safety steps seriously.
Sanitize your hands.
Wear a mask.
Don't be in a hurry. Please wait for the driver to disinfect your car before you get in.
Make sure your mask is on at all times.
And don't forget to sanitize after. I know it's a lot, but it's gonna keep you safe. And when you're safe, I'm safe. Me too.
Me 3.
Me 47. All of us.
Because safety can spread too.
Thanks. Ken?
Thanks, Jim. Good afternoon, everybody. In case you're not familiar with Bay Transit, I'd like to give you a very quick overview of what we do. We are a rural public transportation provider, and we serve the 10 counties in the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck of Virginia, as well as Charles City and New Kent counties. Our service area is over 3,000 square miles, as Mike mentioned, and it's larger than the state of Delaware. Our average one-way passenger trip is 10 miles. Most of the service that we do is demand responsive. We do operate 4 deviated fixed routes and also 3 seasonal trolleys. Next slide, please, Danny. Originally, I was going to be part of a panel presenting to you in Roanoke on developing community partnerships. And I think that's still important because I think some of these partners are people that we can fall back on as we move to restore and grow our ridership. So I want to share a few things that we were working on pre-COVID that we hope will carry over in the future. The first is that we were offering free rides to the polls throughout our service area on Election Day. We've been doing that for a couple of years now, and that has proven to be very popular. We'll continue to do that moving forward. Another thing that we've been involved in is Be a Santa to a Senior, and we partnered with a local home health agency to, they purchased gifts for seniors, and we picked them up and transported them to some of the local senior apartment complexes and helped distribute them. We've done that for a couple of years now, and that's also been extremely popular. Next slide, please, Danny. We work with a group called Remote Area Medical Clinic, and they provide medical services to rural communities, focusing on dental and vision services. We have been providing free rides to these for a couple of years. They're very popular, and we have a lot of folks in our community who don't have access to get to those services. So we've been partnering with them for a couple of years now. Another thing we've been doing for the past 18 months, we have been purchasing and installing bus shelters throughout the service area to serve our riders and to increase our visibility as well as our brand name. We were able to partner with a local community college and hospital to save us nearly $30,000 in installation costs as they took on the responsibility of installing the shelters. You can see in the picture on the right, that's Squall the seagull, who is the mascot for Rappahannock Community College. And this is a ribbon cutting for one of our bus shelters at one of the campuses for Rappahannock Community College. We have developed a great relationship with Rappahannock Community College, and we are currently partnering with them to offer free rides on Bay Transit to and from the campus for students with valid IDs. We just started this in January, so we had 2 months of great success, and then the pandemic came and kind of shut some of these things down. But in the course of 2 months, the free ridership to the college showed that we had an increase of 327% of ridership over the same period last year. We also saw a lot of the students were very pleased with this, and the community college representative said that they thought this was a godsend. So this is a program that is not going on right now because of the virus, but once we figure out what new normal is going to look like and colleges are have their campuses open, we will continue this program, and hopefully it will help us with our ridership. Next slide, please, Danny. Another thing that we do is we operate seasonal trolleys for tourists in the towns of Urbana and Colonial Beach and Kilmarnock. In 2019, through the summer, we obtained a couple of sponsorships, one from a local campground, one from a chamber of commerce, to eliminate the fares for the trolleys. We saw a dramatic increase in ridership on those two trolleys last summer. One had an increase of 100% and one had an increase of 90%, while the one that did not have a sponsor did not show an increase in ridership. So this was another partnership that this year is obviously not going to happen. We're not catering to tourists right now, and we're not operating the trolley because of social distancing. But we will renew this partnership in 2021, hopefully, if things get back to the new normal. So I encourage you to build on your existing relationships and partners as you move to start restoring and growing your ridership. Once the COVID-19 virus hit and we were looking at how we were going to do this presentation, it looked like that a better theme for us was not developing community partnerships, but becoming a better community partner. Next slide, please, Danny. So some of the things, and Scudder and Adrienne and Jim had touched on some of these things, but we implemented suspended fare collection very soon on after the virus hit. We required the drivers and riders to wear masks. We are continuously cleaning the buses. I wish we were doing them as well as the video that Jim had, but we're not quite there yet. And we also installed plexiglass shields, and this is an example of one of them in the slide, to reduce the contact between passengers and drivers. Next slide, please, Danny. Other things that we did is we cordoned off seats for facilitating social distancing. We are doing daily driver screenings and temperature checks to make sure that our drivers have not been exposed, are not showing symptoms of the virus. And because we are mostly demand response, we are able to pre-screen our riders when they call in to schedule a ride and ask them if they are showing symptoms or if they've been exposed to the virus, that they that cancel their trip with us. Regarding service, I think that Scudder and Adrienne talked on this quite a bit. It's important to be nimble and flexible. Short-term needs for your ridership in your community have changed. So you need to change and adjust with them. And I think Adrienne showed some good examples of what they're doing in Richmond. We are trying to do the same thing. The demand is moving towards essential workers, access to groceries, access to medical care, dialysis. And so it's important that you are honing in on what the needs are in your community and responding appropriately. It's also important that you respond to the needs of the community during this pandemic. Some things that we've done is partnering with local nonprofits, with food banks. You might want to see about delivering meals to shut-ins. As this slide shows, Bay Transit employees and Bay Aging employees and Healthy Harvest Food Bank employees are stuffing grocery bags at the food bank. And then once they were stuffed, Bay Transit drivers put these bags in their buses and delivered them to area senior apartment programs. We were supporting Bay Aging's mobile food pantry program. So it's really part of, it's an opportunity to become a better part of the fabric of your community. It will build ridership in the long run. It will endear you more to your community, not just as a transit provider, but as a good neighbor and a good citizen. So I think all of these strategies that you can do to respond to your community will pay off in your ridership as we start to build and restore moving forward. Now, there certainly are some challenges. I want to touch on a couple of those that we're seeing, and I'm sure some of you are seeing them as well. For us, fare collection is a challenge. We do not have a touchless fare collection right now. Looking at the price of them, it's probably 2 or 3 times the cost of our annual fare revenue, so I don't know that we can justify that expense. So we're looking, do we go back to the old way of collecting fares? Do we eliminate fares altogether, completely? Or do we bite the bullet and invest in a touchless fare system? We don't know yet what we're going to do, but we are, it's one of the problems that we're grappling with. Another is social distancing and wheelchair securement. We provide a lot of service to people in wheelchairs, and how we can better secure those wheelchairs and reduce the number of the opportunities for any infection from the virus or contact between the driver and the passenger are things that we are trying to figure out what the best practices will be for that going forward. Another thing that I think is on everyone's mind is the possible loss of local match funding due to decreased local revenues. I've already been contacted by a couple of the counties in our service area that they don't have the revenues coming in, and they don't think they're going to be able to fund public transit in fiscal year 21. What are the things that we can do to bridge that gap? Can we find other sources of grant funds? Work with DRPT and FTA? What will the CARES Act have for us? But we really want to find ways to bridge the gap between now and when local economies will show some improvement and our local governments will be able to better fund the transit that they've been funding. So we're really concerned that this is an issue going forward, and how do we respond to that? Finally, and probably the most important thing, is restoring the public's faith in transit. And I think all of us have touched on that to some extent. Bay Transit is in the initial stages of a initiative to restore faith in Bay Transit. We are going to look at all the different means of media to get it out there. And as Jim mentioned, it's a matter of proving it, not just saying it. You have to prove on a daily basis how safe it is to ride your buses. I was on a webinar recently with Carmen Bianco was one of the presenters. He's the former president of the New York City Transit Company. And his question to us was, are you comfortable with your family riding your public transportation? Because if you're not comfortable, then your riders aren't comfortable either. And the only way they're going to be comfortable is if you show them what you're doing and prove it day in and day out. It doesn't matter if the mayor tells me that it's safe for me to ride public transit, or the governor tells me that it's safe, or even if the president tells me that it's safe. If I don't believe in my heart and see that it's safe for me to ride on your public transit system, then I'm not going to do it. So I urge you to go out there and make your vehicles as safe as possible and prove it to your ridership. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you to all of our panelists and for all of our participants. I think you raised some excellent questions, some tough questions, but also some potential solutions, and a reminder to all of us that we are providing an essential service, and that transit, public transportation, is a way to connect our communities, and we are good neighbors in facilitating that. So now I'm going to look at, we're going to do our trivia quiz in just a minute, but before we get to that, let's take a look at some of the questions that have been submitted. Mike, do you want to lead with that? Did we lose Mike? Okay.
Mike,
I believe Danny's going to ask the questions. I'm not.
Okay. All right.
Mike Norvell asked, is anyone currently using a touchless fare collection system?
If anybody is, unmute yourself and speak directly. We can hear you.
I would add, or exploring the use of a touchless fare collection system.
Okay, maybe that's an answer.
This is Scudder. I don't know of anyone in Virginia that has a completely touchless system. Obviously, Smart Trip cards are close to touchless, or near, in the DC region, but you still have to get pretty close to physically touching the terminal. I would just add on this question, I think this question raises the idea of how much should we be thinking about moving to proof of purchase on fares on health grounds, to minimize interaction. It obviously requires, rethinking how you sell fares and meeting machines or alternative arrangements for people to purchase fares. But, this adds another thing to the column of considerations for possibly going to proof of purchase on more of our systems.
Okay, we've got another question from Carrie Rose Pace. Carrie asks, I was interested in the social distance markings added at bus stops, but I'm not sure that is reasonable for all systems where social distancing on board simply isn't feasible with existing bus operator resources. How are you enforcing and sustaining physical distance without leaving passengers stranded at bus stops? And are any transit systems in our region tracking potential COVID-19 cases among riders? I know we all are for our staff, but are there any that are monitoring rider exposure?
Jim, in your one of your slides, it showed that there were social distance markings on the sidewalk. Was that some type of projection image, or was it painted on the sidewalk, or what?
It was literally painted on the sidewalk. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And that has, you know, implications in jurisdictions. I mean, it's not a panacea for sure, because we don't always own our own stations and stops. But I think in this environment, most communities we've found are cooperative with that. To answer this specific question that Carrie Rose has, I'm not aware of anybody that is tracking their riders, you know, checking to see if they have temperatures or verifying that they're COVID free. Not of any across the nation that I've heard, at least.
So another follow-up that Carrie had was regarding, you know, they're practicing all of the safety measures that we've discussed, but you know, what can they do when other passengers may be perceived as unsafe for not wearing masks or not using the hand sanitizer when boarding and sitting too close to others, etc. And I know we've been discussing that as part of our campaign to try to restore confidence in Bay Transit. And what we are hoping to do is to be able to have both masks available for riders who don't have their own mask, as well as a touchless hand sanitizer deployment station right there when you're getting onto the bus. We may even look at doing that at our bus stops as well. So those are some of the things we're trying to do to make it easy for everybody to participate in the guidance we're suggesting as part of our campaign to restore confidence in riding on Bay Transit.
And Mike, your example that you're using, and just to amplify that, is exactly what the New York MTA is doing. They have on the subways, they have masks at every station for free, and they also have hand sanitizer bottles, actually individual hand sanitizer bottles that they're handing out for free. Obviously, that's at a huge cost to them. But they felt it was necessary in order to do just what you were talking about, rebuilding trust in the system.
And the other thing we're hoping to do is, as Ken was describing, we have already partitions that keep the driver separated from the riders, but we're also looking at partitions between the seats. And that's an opportunity for us to have some positive messaging on those plexiglass partitions that reinforce things like we're very, you know, we're committed to cleaning, and we're dedicated to disinfecting, and you know, we're asking everybody to be part of our program and wear their mask. So you know, we're looking at reinforcing messaging wherever possible, at our bus shelters, on our buses, in the local media. To make sure people know that we are pledging and we are committing to make the bus safe for them, and we ask them to commit to like that Uber video you showed us, Jim, to make it safe for everybody else that's riding the bus as well.
Okay.
This is Scudder. I would just add to that. The most recent evidence we're seeing from places like Japan and France is that with good compliance on mask usage, some modest ventilation improvements, and a few other things, that the risk of COVID transmission on transit is very low. I think the challenge that we face, and Carrie, makes a great point in her question, is we just don't have the same level of social compliance with that guidance. And unfortunately, that comes down to, in France and Japan, you just have a much stronger messaging from the national and state level agencies and leaders about those factors that's making it easier. And we just don't quite have the same level of messaging here, unfortunately.
Okay. Mike, is that our final question?
Those are all the questions.
Okay, good ones at that.